Good afternoon. Welcome to the Google Hangout discussion of the groundbreaking report entitled Paying an Unfair Price, the Financial Penalty for Being LGBT in America, which was released yesterday. We have some of the report authors with us on this Hangout, and we're excited to talk to you about the report. And I'm going to pop up our slides here. Everyone can see them. So these are our great report partners and co-authors. We have MAP, the Center for American Progress, Center for Community Change, the Center for Popular Democracy, the National Association of Social Workers, and the National Education Association. And on the call today, or on the Google Hangout today, we have Inika from the Movement Advancement Project, Laura Durso from CAP, Connie from the Center for Popular Democracy, and I'm Naomi Goldberg, and I'm the moderator today from the Movement Advancement Project. And with that, I am going to pass it over to Inika. And as we're going through, if you have questions, we welcome you to share them on Twitter using the hashtag #unfairprice, all one word. You can also post them to the comment section of the YouTube video, and we'll be monitoring there. And you can also post to the MAP Facebook page if that's how you're accessing the Google Hangout today. So let's hear from Inika and how the report came to be and some of the key findings. Inika?
Thanks, Naomi. So this is Inika Mishovic. I'm the Executive Director of the Movement Advancement Project, and I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. And I wanted to just briefly talk a little bit about the genesis of this report. For those of you who potentially follow MAP's work, you'll note that we have done a number of reports that actually look at vulnerable LGBT populations. And those have included looking at LGBT older adults, transgender Americans, workers of color, LGBT families with children. And one of the things that we found throughout our work was this common thread of how anti-LGBT laws actually impact LGBT populations economically. And so our teams took a step back and worked with other organizations and said, wouldn't it be interesting to just kind of take a look, take an economic lens and take a look at the economic impact of anti-LGBT laws on LGBT people. And so, Naomi, if you have the slides back up, what the report found was that there are 3 broad legal failures that really hurt LGBT people economically and financially. And the report actually shows that it's really the interplay and cumulative effect of these 3 categories of laws. So when you think about legal discrimination, that's discrimination in the workplace, in credit, and housing, and makes it harder for LGBT people to find a job. Lack of family recognition is denial of marriage or laws that fail to recognize LGBT parents who are raising children, which then impacts the ability of LGBT people to
I know, I see it. And it worked downstairs.
To access safety net programs, to access family tax credits and breaks, etc. And then there are also hostile educational environments which impact LGBT people. When they go to school, it makes it harder for them to get a good education, and also the kids of LGBT parents. And those 3 sets of laws
there we go. Okay, well, there we go.
Work together to create higher costs and less income for LGBT people generally. So when you think about lower income, you think about the ways that the laws affect people. For instance, job discrimination. Obviously, if it's harder to find a job, that's problematic. It'll affect your income. But also things like denial of Social Security benefits or pensions for surviving spouses. And then higher costs, there's a whole range of those. It's everything from paying more for tax preparation to actually paying more in taxes because you're denied the ability to file as married, to pay more for family health insurance because you're not recognized as a family under the law. So the next slide shows that anti-LGBT laws actually particularly hurt vulnerable LGBT populations. And so, we talk a little bit about, some of the unintended consequences of anti-LGBT laws is not only does it make people more economically vulnerable, but then it actually disproportionately impacts those folks who are already struggling. So, first of all, if you're already living on the margins and then you are denied something like Social Security, spousal benefits, or survivor benefits, that could make the difference between being able to live in the home that you've shared with your partner for the last 10 years or not being able to keep that home. And then second, those who are living on the margins also don't have the finances to try to mitigate to some degree the impact of anti-LGBT laws. Not that finances can overcome the cumulative effect, but they can help to some degree. But if you don't have money, you can't afford to go out of state to marry and be recognized as married by the federal government, or you might have to choose between putting food on the table and affording a second parent adoption. Or if your child is being bullied in school, you may not be able to afford to send your kids to a different school where they'll receive a safe and supportive education. So then the next slide, what the data shows is, we already know from a policy perspective all of the different ways that anti-LGBT laws, add up, both kind of literally and metaphorically for LGBT people, and it's pretty stark and startling to look at some of the differences. So this slide shows the income for opposite-sex couples and same-sex couples in states with and without marriage. But when you think a little bit more broadly, the states with marriage also have non-discrimination protections, safe school laws. They recognize LGBT parents. So really, the bar graph that's on the left are states that have a lot of protections for LGBT people. And in those states, same-sex couples raising kids earn about $700 less than their heterosexual counterparts. By contrast, in states that lack protections for LGBT people, including marriage, that income gap is almost $9,000. So we see a huge financial impact depending on what the state of the law is that impacts LGBT people and their families. And so I'm actually going to pass it over to Laura now, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the solutions.
Thank you, Inika. And again, my name is Laura Durso, and I am the director of the LGBT Research and Communications Project at the Center for American Progress. As Inika was describing, and as you'll read in the report, there are really a number of eye-opening statistics that we found while producing the report. And really what we all care about is, well, what kinds of things are we going to do to fix those problems? And we think of it in terms of a number of different categories of policy solutions to address these concerns. And I want to start with the most macro, which is to say that LGBT communities will benefit from policies that will improve the economic lives of all Americans. So when we talk about that, we're talking about things like increasing the minimum wage, job corps training and development of good quality paying jobs for all Americans. And we're also talking about things like strengthening the social safety net. One thing that we learned when doing this report was that LGBT Americans are more likely to report receiving public assistance, and so strengthening the safety net will help the lives of all Americans, but also LGBT Americans in particular. So we really want to look to be making those macro level changes to improve the lives of all people. And then if we move to the types of legal discrimination that are outlined in the report, such as the issue of marriage equality, which I think a lot of people would think about as a policy solution, but there are many other ways in which LGBT Americans are denied protections of the law. And so what we would recommend is that all federal, state, and local policies be updated to ensure non-discrimination for LGBT people in all domains of life. So certainly things like employment, but also housing, credit, and I wanted to mention health insurance in particular, where we see the potential for real impact on the lives of LGBT people. We at CAP have been focused on ensuring that trans people can access quality medically necessary care related to transition, and we've actually had some success at the state level in ensuring that plans cannot exclude transition-related care. And so that's one way in which we've approached addressing the issue of non-discrimination for a particularly vulnerable portion of our community. And medical debt's important, and I wanted to note, as Inika mentioned, that there's a real interrelatedness between all of these policy issues. So medical debt can impact one's credit, and then ability to access credit will impact one's ability to own a home. And so all these issues are really interconnected, and we see health as particularly important to ensure that people have economic stability. Next, we wanted to talk about recommendations around updating family law, and this is certainly something, again, around marriage and other family policies related to adoption and parenting, but it's also around things like family leave and the ability to take time in order to care for loved ones, be they spouses, children, grandparents, older Americans, and we need to see some real changes in the ways in which we define family and recognize the need to have all of us care for each other in times of need. And so we recommend certainly that states and governments look to update those policies in order to have an LGBT inclusive way of defining family. Next in the report, we talk about educational environments for LGBT young people. We have bills like the Student Non-Discrimination Act that are pending in Congress, and these would, tied in with the non-discrimination idea, these would ensure that young people have access to a quality education, that they are not bullied and forced out of their schools, often into what's called the school-to-prison pipeline, which then further criminalizes them and takes them out of what we know to be a really crucial component of economic stability, which is the ability to get an education and get a quality job as a result. Would also point to more local models, such as the School Success and Opportunity Act in California, which made sure that trans students could access locker rooms and restrooms consistent with their gender identity, so that folks aren't being forced, again, out of their schools and can be assured of obtaining that high school degree. So we would recommend that as well. And then finally, I would point to, again, a more macro level recommendation, which is to increase data collection at the state and federal and local levels. We really lack a complete understanding of the lives of LGBT Americans, and it's data collection that's going to help us understand what the characteristics and the needs of our community are. And so as a final recommendation, we are looking to increase the number of federal and state surveys that ask questions about sexual orientation and gender identity, so that we can truly understand the needs of the community and look for ways that we can address poverty concerns, and then make sure that we are held accountable to those policy changes over time and make sure we're actually making a difference. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Laura. And now I'd like to turn it over to Connie from the Center for Popular Democracy to talk a little bit about the work that CPD is doing and how this report sort of fits into that broader work.
Thank you. I'm Connie Raza. I'm the Director of Strategic Research and Technology for the Center for Popular Democracy. CPD works to create equity, opportunity, and a dynamic democracy in partnership with over 80 high-impact base-building organizations, organizing alliances, and progressive unions. We work with
Connie, I think somehow you're muted. Can we try unmuting yourself?
Am I muted?
Ah, there you are.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay.
Okay.
So, was I muted the whole time?
We heard your introduction.
Oh, strange. Okay. So we work with our partner organizations in communities of color and low-income communities across the country to envision and win innovative, pro-worker, pro-immigrant, racial and economic justice victories, and we're proud to partner with the Movement Advancement Project and the Center for American Progress and the other partners on this important project. At a time when so many American families are struggling to make ends meet, the findings in Paying an Unfair Price point to an even bleaker reality for those who are both LGBT and people of color. While 18% of all non-LGBT adults and 29% of all LGBT adults are food insecure, 36% of Latino and Latina LGBT adults, 37% of Black LGBT adults, and 55% of Native American LGBT adults have high rates of food insecurity. Similarly, 4% of all adults, 5% of all Latino adults, and 9% of all Black adults face extreme poverty, but 28% of transgender and gender nonconforming Latino adults and 34% of transgender and gender nonconforming Black adults face extreme poverty or incomes below $10,000 a year. This report shows that in our popular policies and drive our lives, we have to stop imagining that when we're speaking about LGBT issues, we're talking about rich white people. Because of discriminatory laws and practices, LGBT people disproportionately lack economic, food, and healthcare security. LGBT people of color living at the intersection of multiple forms of discrimination have to individuals to economic strength of trade. We have policy solutions that groups like our partner organizations will be able to promote and move on the local and state level in order to protect some of our most vulnerable individuals and families.
Great, thank you, Connie. Evelyn, I'm going to turn it over to you. Evelyn from the National Association of Social Workers, and Evelyn, you need to unmute yourself if possible. Oh, you're still muted, Evelyn.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Did I
there
unmute
you
myself?
are. Hello. Welcome.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I guess that what I want to start with is the statistics speak. The numbers speak and the data speaks for what we have known in our day-to-day practice as social workers and allied advocates, providers. So I want to first thank everyone for putting this document together and providing us with incredible information and resources that we can use in our practice. As I began to think about a few things I wanted to say in my brief time in hopes that I would actually get on the line, is thinking about social workers and how they might use this document. And certainly as food for thought, as information, as ways to take the data into their local community, their state-level community advocacy, and federal advocacy. And I always go to this document, which I was looking at, which is called Social Work Speaks. And it is the document that guides our profession. It's developed from our delegate assembly process, and we're about to publish a new Social Work Speaks later this year, and with a revised policy statement on LGBT issues, as a matter of fact. But as I was going through it and looking at some of the content that the research documents in this report, it clearly reminds me I need to put out there that NASW and social workers, or NASW on behalf of social workers, opposes any and all workplaces that limits any opportunity, a chance for advancement, or getting hired in the first place on any form of discrimination, but for today's particular focus, sexual orientation, gender identity. All forms of violence, bullying, we have clear bullying, anti-bullying policies. Violence that's based on intimidation, whether it's be a person's race, religious belief, gender or gender identity, sexual orientation, disability status. The research in this document is going to help us take these policies and implement them into changing law. This bullying also includes sexual orientation conversion efforts, or so-called reparative therapies, that I think as a profession, as social workers and other allied providers, we need to look at bullying as not only, in addition to how it affects youth and their families, but the belief that one has the right, or a person has the right, to change someone's sexual orientation or gender identity. And we are vehemently opposed to that, and we're opposed to any public dollars being spent on reparative therapy. So what do we support? We support the expansion of federal and state measures that prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation, transgender, gender identity. We support school-based programming that addresses anti-bullying campaigns, as well as ensures that those that work in the school, advocate within the school, serve our children and serve our communities have research-based information on working with, understanding LGBT youth and their families, the mental health needs, the development needs, the specific mental health needs of the communities. So I bring all that forth because I think sometimes people will think, well, how does social work fit into this kind of data? And social work is rooted in anti-poverty work and really addressing how poverty impacts our families. And this report just brings together very specific data on how we can work with one particular broad community of LGBT individuals that in turn will help, I believe, all communities. So that's what I was hoping to say today, so thank you.
Great, thanks, Evelyn. So now I think we'll go ahead and open it up to questions. So again, if you have questions via Twitter using the hashtag #UnfairPrice on our Facebook page, or directly in the YouTube comment section. And looking, I received a question asking, the Supreme Court will probably just take up marriage in this next session. You know, won't that fix all of this? To what extent will marriage fix it? Inika, do you want to take that, or Laura?
Sure, I can take that, Naomi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, just making sure I'm coming through. Yeah, so that was one of the reasons that I kind of started the report overview with looking at how the three areas of law kind of create a cumulative effect for LGBT people. So the short answer is no. The Supreme Court decision on marriage, if there is one coming, would not actually fix all of this. And part of the challenge is when you look at the report, you'll notice about half of the states in the U.S. right now lack almost any form of protection for LGBT people. And it's not just marriage and parental recognition, but it's also in those other areas of law, non-discrimination protection, and then safe school environments and kind of anti-bullying protection for kids. And so, you know, we hear all the time from LGBT people who live in states that lack those protections, and even if they feel like they are eligible for something like family health care benefits, potentially under a company policy, they're afraid to ask about those benefits because just the simple act of asking, you know, would your company cover my same-sex spouse or partner under this health insurance policy, could result in them losing their job, and they're not having any ability or legal recourse to kind of do anything about that. So, you know, I think even if we do see marriage pass, one of the things that this report shows is how much other work there still is that needs to be done.
Great, thanks, Inika. So I'm wondering, Connie, I think this question makes sense for you to address it. It's around sort of how do we both integrate LGBT, what initiatives should LGBT advocates look to help reduce poverty and increase economic security for communities of color, and then vice versa? Like, how does that intersectional work? What should that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think given the among LGBT folks, and particularly LGBT folks of color, the fights around minimum wage that are happening across the country, fights for predictable scheduling that's responsive to the needs of people's families, but also ensures that people are getting enough hours to support themselves. Those are important fights, but I would also urge people to think about policing reform. Risk is a policy that impacts communities of color and impacts LGBT communities, each disproportionately. When you live at the intersection of those two identities, you're impacted even more heavily. And some of our partner organizations are doing work precisely around this issue. And just to sort of build on what Laura was saying about the interrelatedness of these different policies, if you're more likely to get stopped and frisked if condoms are taken as a indicator of prostitution and you're booked, right, then you're going to have a harder time when you're applying for work going forward. And so although it's a criminal justice issue, also an economic justice issue.
Great, thanks. And I think we'll take one more question before we wrap up. And Laura, I'm wondering, the extent you can talk about, this data that shows that LGBT people are really more likely to live in poverty. The question is, I thought that LGBT people, that gay people, had more money. Can you talk a little bit about this sort of emerging research? Oh, and unmute yourself. There you are.
Great. Thanks, Naomi. Yeah, I think this is a really persistent stereotype of the LGBT community, that folks are largely wealthy, live in urban centers, and now we're going on years and decades worth of research that tells us that those stereotypes are really not true. So I often think about, when you think about an LGBT family, people might have the modern family construction, so Mitch, Cam, and their adopted child, when really what you should think of as a Black lesbian couple living in the South. And the research that we do have, and again with the caveat that we need to know more, but what we do have really shows this strong pattern that LGBT people are more vulnerable to poverty. And that's when we take into consideration things that we know to relate to poverty, such as educational attainment, where people are growing up and living, how, what types of engagement in the workforce they have, whether they're working full-time or not. And so, we really have this picture of who the most vulnerable among us are, and those tend to be children of same-sex couples. So, for example, one of the statistics you'll read in the report is that children of Black male same-sex couples, half of them are living in poverty. And so, this is an economic justice issue to the extent that who we're talking about and what the data really show is that it's communities of color that are bearing the brunt of this problem. And so our policies really need to be comprehensive around things like race and sexual orientation and gender identity and immigration status and other components of people's lived experiences that impact their economic security. So it's a myth, but we're hoping that the data that this report outlines will really help to increase people's awareness about the problem and ways to fix that.
Great, thank you. So I just want to thank everyone, all of our panelists for participating and also for your collaboration on this report. And to say to everyone who's watching, you can check out the report, including all of the infographics. We have some really great infographics in the report, not only to outline the arguments that Inika made, but also a lot of the demographics that Laura presented, as well as a video that we produced that shows one LGBT person's sort of unfair cost or unfair price that she has to pay. And you can check all of that out at www.lgbtmap.org. And we encourage you to continue sharing your own unfair price using social media. Thank you for joining us, and take care.